Hello and welcome to The Mohit Show. Today I'm covering victim testimony from the Rape Gang Inquiry, the independent, privately funded inquiry led by MP Rupert Lowe, whose 219-page report came out this month. It documents the organized sexual exploitation of children across Britain, much of it ignored for years by the police, councils, and social services who were supposed to protect them. I'm reading this because it deserves to be heard, and because too many of the institutions that should have acted looked away, in some cases out of fear of being called racist, in others out of plain cowardice. People have a right to know what happened, even when it's harrowing, and even when it raises questions some would rather not ask. The account I'm covering is from a survivor of the report called Chloe, a pseudonym used to protect her identity. She was first abused at 10 and then failed, again and again, by her family, the police, social services, her school, found by officers in cars with her abusers and dismissed as a prostitute, handed contraception advice instead of protection, trafficked across the country and raped over years by men she describes as predominantly Muslim and Pakistani. What was done to her and what was allowed to continue is almost unbearable to read, but she put it on the record, and the least we can do is listen. If others would rather stay silent, I'll keep giving these survivors a voice, because that silence is part of how this was allowed to happen. Now on to the testimony. Chloe. Throughout her early childhood, Chloe was popular at school, performed well academically, and enjoyed an active social life. Although her parents separated when she was young, she describes her early upbringing as relatively stable. Following the separation, full custody of Chloe and her older brother was awarded to their father, despite his alcoholism. Her mother, on the other hand, was often absent from her life and became homeless following the separation. Chloe recalls a generally secure and supportive home environment under the care of her father. However, following his sudden death just before her 10th birthday, she moved in with her mother and her mother's new husband, a man she describes as a pedophile, by whom she was sexually abused. Chloe's mother caught her husband assaulting Chloe on many occasions, but did little to stop it. On one occasion, Chloe's mother caught her husband in the shower with Chloe, and instead of intervening, she closed the door and walked out. At this time, Chloe was 10 years old. The abuse soon escalated to rape. Chloe's stepfather supplied her with alcohol and cigarettes to keep her quiet, and she began smoking cannabis. Around the same time, Chloe started truanting and spent time at the local town center with a friend unsupervised. She describes groups of Muslim men, primarily Pakistanis, aged 20 to over 50, showing them attention, including wolf whistling and buying them alcohol. Many of them were taxi drivers who would take the girls into their cars and drive them around town. At this stage, there was no sexual abuse, and although the men's behavior was clearly inappropriate, Chloe and her friend, then in their final year of primary school, enjoyed being treated like adults. The grooming soon intensified. The provision of alcohol and takeaways was accompanied by emotional manipulation, with the men, many of whom were related to one another, presenting themselves as sympathetic friends to Chloe. Chloe describes this process as them mapping out, "You are a vulnerable person?" Physical contact, including kisses and massages, became increasingly common, Meanwhile, the abuse by her stepfather at home worsened, and her mother was all but absent as a guardian. At this time, Chloe had an aunt and uncle who lived nearby, and she often sought refuge with them. She had spent holidays with them during her earlier childhood, and felt that she could trust them. On one occasion, she had visited them while truanting, and before returning home and spending the day there while her mother and stepfather were at work. To Chloe's surprise, her uncle arrived at her house unannounced an hour later, and she invited him inside. After a brief conversation, Chloe's uncle sexually assaulted her. Chloe resisted, and he relented and left. She told her mother about the assault, and her mother reported it to the police. The police accused Chloe of lying, and no further action was taken. Until this incident, she had regarded her uncle as one of the best people in her life. Afterwards, there were no adults left that Chloe could confide in or seek support from. Increasingly isolated, she became more deeply involved with the groups of Muslim men she encountered in the town center. One evening, Chloe's friend suggested that they travel to a nearby town where one of the men had a hotel room. They were picked up by the man, who was drunk and under the influence of drugs, and taken to the hotel. When they arrived, hotel staff saw them but did not intervene. Hotel staff saw them but did not intervene. In the room, the girls were given a potent strain of cannabis, which left Chloe, then 11, absolutely smashed. Chloe's friend was taken to another room by a group of men, and Chloe was groped by the man who remained. Chloe resisted, and he hit her. The man did not attempt to sexually assault her again, and instead threw the girls, both of whom were still intoxicated, out of the hotel and refused to drive them back to their hometown. They were forced to walk. It was around midnight. Chloe did not want to go back to her home as she feared her mother would beat her for being out late, so stayed with her friend. In the early hours of the morning, Chloe was collected from a friend's house by the police after her mother reported her missing. Chloe lied to the police and her mother about where she had been. Chloe's mother grounded her for a month, meaning she was stuck at home with her predatory stepfather, a period she describes as torture. After the month passed, Chloe arranged to see her friend, who boasted that she had a new boyfriend. Chloe left the house to meet her, and the girls were picked up by the boyfriend, who is in fact a 25-year-old Indian man. Initially, Chloe thought the man was nice, posher than the other men she had met in the town center. He took Chloe and her friend to a shop where he purchased a bottle of vodka, before picking up one of his friends and taking the girls to a secluded location. During the journey, the men began pressuring the girls for sex. Chloe refused, stating that she was on her period, but the men replied it did not matter. Night was falling when they arrived, and the boyfriend took Chloe's friend out of the car, leaving Chloe alone with the other man. He proceeded to rape her on the back seats. This incident took place in 2003. In 2022, Chloe took the two men to court, but neither were found guilty. From this moment, Chloe's life spiraled. At 12 years old, she began drinking heavily, smoking large amounts of cannabis, and taking harder drugs, including ecstasy. Anything to block it out of her mind. She would drink before school just to get through the day. Her attendance dropped significantly. She and her friend would spend school hours in the town center, walking around until somebody picked them up in a car, somebody bought them alcohol, or somebody gave them drugs. There were times when Chloe would be missing for up to 3 days, during which time she was passed between taxis, drugged, abused, raped, and in every case, the perpetrators were Muslims, primarily Pakistani. On one occasion, Chloe was abducted by an abuser, who was driving drunk and taken to a graveyard. He gave Chloe, still 12 years old, whiskey before forcing himself on her and raping her. He withdrew before ejaculation and forced the emptied whiskey bottle into Chloe's vagina where it shattered. Chloe submitted herself to A&E, but no questions were asked about how she had sustained such an injury. She was examined, the glass was removed, and she was discharged. A 12-year-old girl shows up to the hospital with an empty whiskey bottle shattered inside of her vagina, and no questions were asked. No questions were asked at all. They just treated her and just left her. Nothing was done. Chloe was questioned by police due to her absence on a number of occasions. Of course, yeah, they have time to question children for their absences, but, not go after the rapists. Each time, she was asked where she had been, who she had been with, and what she had been doing. She replied that she had been having sex with adult males in cars. Rather than opening an investigation and pursuing her abusers, the police dismissed Chloe as a prostitute. They asked her whether she was consenting to the sexual activity. And despite Chloe telling them that she did not know the definition of the word consent, they reported that she had been. A 12-year-old girl who does not know the definition of the term consent, who's gone to an emergency room with shattered glass in her vagina, and they did nothing. Nothing at all. She didn't know what consent meant. The police found Chloe, as well as the other missing children, in cars with the gang members on multiple occasions, but let the gang members go without so much as questioning them. On one occasion, Chloe was in the town center and was identified as a missing child by a police officer who questioned where she had been. Chloe told this police officer about the full extent of the abuse, and the response of the police officer was that nothing could be done, and Chloe was let go. Nothing can be done, apparently. In response to her truancy and deteriorating behavior, the school regularly placed Chloe in isolation and compelled her to attend additional after-school classes every day. They did little to improve her emotional state, and she continued to spend time with her friend and her friend's boyfriend. This went on for a number of years. The boyfriend would supply the girls with alcohol and drugs, as well as introducing them to his friends, who were exclusively South Asian men. On one occasion, he took the girls to his place of work, a textiles factory, where he raped Chloe. Following the incident, Chloe stopped spending time with the friend who, up until this point, had accompanied her through the exploitation. By this time, Chloe had become so accustomed to her lifestyle of spending time with the Muslim gangs that she continued to do so without her friend. On one occasion, following another late return home, her mother grounded her for 2 months. Fearing further abuse from her stepfather, Chloe walked to a nearby social services office while her mother was at work and reported him. Chloe was interviewed by the social workers about the abuse, after which her mother and stepfather were arrested and questioned. Both denied that the abuse was taking place and were released without charge. Chloe made further appeals to social services and was eventually removed from the house and placed in foster care. She lived with a couple who cared for several other foster children, and though she found them snobby and judgmental, found some sense of stability with them, but they did not last long. She was still living in the same town, so when she went into the town center, as she often did both alone and with the foster carers, the Muslim gangs would recognize and target her. She remained at the same school, and because she now lived further away, the foster carers paid for taxis to take her there. She would ask the taxi drivers to drop her near the school, and rather than attending, would walk to one of the neighborhoods where the Muslim gangs spent their time. The gangs would take her into their taxis, ply her with drugs and alcohol, and sexually abuse her. Around the age of 13, Chloe disclosed to social services that she was being abused by gangs of Muslim men. She's 13 now, just 13. In response, social services did not intervene, but rather talked to Chloe about contraception and sexual health. One social worker started regularly taking Chloe to a sexual health clinic, where she was diagnosed with chlamydia in her throat and vagina, gonorrhea, genital warts, and pelvic inflammatory disease. Neither the social worker nor the clinic staff questioned or reported this. The police were aware of Chloe's activities, but instead of targeting those responsible for her abuse, they routinely failed to question them, let alone pursue further action, when Chloe was found in cars and houses with them. Chloe was soon moved to a different foster placement with a far more protective carer. On one occasion, a gang came to the foster home searching for Chloe, and the carer fought them in the street to protect her. That's what you're supposed to do. Around the time Chloe turned 14, a social worker approached her about her ongoing sexual exploitation. This was one of the first times this had happened, and Chloe was relieved that her abuse was finally being addressed. However, rather than offering a solution, the social worker instead told Chloe that the producers of Emmerdale were looking for a young actress to play a victim of child sexual exploitation, and asked whether she would be interested in auditioning for the role given her experience. Following this exchange, Chloe, upset, angry, and in a state of disbelief, ran away from the foster home, and after being abducted by a Muslim gang, was missing for 6 months. Over this period, she was trafficked across the length and breadth of Britain. She was taken to house after house and raped and abused by guy after guy after guy. The men who abused her paid money to the gang, which treated her as little more than a commodity. She was reported missing and her photograph was shown on TV. Her abusers remarked on this. "You're that girl off the TV that's missing." But her whereabouts were never reported to the police. Chloe describes a cycle of grooming, rape, and drug and alcohol abuse. This went on until eventually she was located by the police. When the police found her, she was in the car with a South Asian Muslim man. The man was let go without charge, and she was returned to her mother's house. Chloe's relationship with her mother had completely broken down by this point, so she continued to run away, and her psychological state deteriorated further. Following another period of grooming and sexual exploitation by a Muslim gang, Chloe was taken into police custody and transported into a secure unit at a children's home. She describes the home as being like a prison. Every aspect of her life was controlled and surveilled, and she was routinely subjected to bodily examinations, including full cavity searches. Chloe found the experience highly traumatic. She remained there for 9 months, by which time she was almost 15. Social services determined that she was well enough to be released, and she was placed in foster care not far from where she had been living before. Chloe describes the new carers as a positive and encouraging presence in her life, and in spite of her proximity to the sites of her abuse and exploitation, Chloe found stability and security living with them. She enrolled in a full-time hairdressing and beauty course at a nearby college, and for the next 2 years, Chloe describes her life as fantastic. As Chloe approached her 18th birthday, social services notified her that her foster care would soon end. They identified a house for her, and after parting ways with her carer, she moved in and got a retail job to support herself. Despite having little experience taking care of herself, Chloe's life remained generally stable through this period. Eventually, Chloe re-established contact with the friend whom she had been abused with as a young child. She invited her over to her house, and when she arrived, she was accompanied by a group of Muslim men, all of whom remembered Chloe from the past abuse. Immediately, Chloe's life was thrown back into chaos. The men refused to leave, and in Chloe's words, it was no longer my quiet little house. It was their house. They smashed windows, kicked in doors, and left the house an absolute wreck and sexually abused Chloe. One of the men, a previous abuser, pinned her down, pulled his trousers down, and sat on her face, orally raping her on the sofa as the rest of the gang watched. Chloe returned to drugs and alcohol to cope. Though she was still working in retail, her ability to work was rapidly declining. During one shift, one of her colleagues, someone she was friends with, jokingly pinched her bottom. Chloe, traumatized by years of abuse, punched him in the face in the middle of the shop. She was brought before management and tried to argue her case, but was fired. Left with no income, Chloe spiraled further. The Muslim gang was still occupying her house, and with nowhere else to go and no ability to remove them, she remained there with them. They routinely drugged, abused, and raped her, including with objects including soft drink cans, keys, and a baseball bat. Before long, they started to pay her bills to consolidate their presence in her home. On a number of occasions, they brought young children into Chloe's house to abuse them. Chloe recalls a number of occasions when boys under the age of 18 from the Muslim community were pressured and bullied by their older friends and relatives into raping her. Chloe was forced to commit crimes, including insurance fraud and the holding of drugs. On one occasion, she contacted the police to report an assault that was taking place in her house, and when they arrived, Chloe was threatened with arrest rather than the gang members, as the property was registered in her name. One evening, an associate of the gang from a neighborhood town arrived at the house. A notorious sex trafficker, he soon began taking Chloe to bars and nightclubs in the surrounding area. There, he would spike her with heroin before handing her over to men who sexually assaulted and raped her. Chloe became addicted to opiates, and her health deteriorated rapidly. She became anorexic, weighing just 5 stone at the age of 18. The use of heroin and the method of control by the gang, as it left her with no ability to defend herself physically. Her daily existence became a relentless cycle of rape, exploitation, and violence. Eventually, a social worker visited Chloe and was shocked by both her appearance and the conditions in which she was living. Concerned for her welfare, she took Chloe to an addiction clinic, where tests revealed an extremely high concentration of opiates in her system. Chloe was prescribed medication to manage her opioid dependency and gradually weaned herself off the drugs. Around this time, Chloe reconnected with a childhood friend, and their friendship soon developed into a romantic relationship. Her boyfriend became aware of the ongoing abuse, and with the help of his father, paid off Chloe's remaining rent and moved her out of her squalid house. Chloe moved in with him, after which she got another job in retail. For a short period, Chloe's life was relatively stable, but due to her unresolved trauma, she soon returned to drinking heavily, smoking cannabis, and gambling. Her workplace was close to her first foster home, and before long she came back into contact with members of the gang that had abused her at the time. The cycle of grooming, exploitation, and abuse soon resumed. Her relationship with her boyfriend broke down, and out of desperation, she re-established contact with her mother, who had left her predatory husband, and moved back in with her. One night, Chloe was out with members of the gang and drinking heavily. Upon her return to her mother's house, her mother reported her to the police. The police arrested Chloe while she was changing into her pajamas, and she was taken to the police station drunk and half naked. She was kept in a cell until 2 a.m. the following morning, at which point she was released. They did not provide her with any clothes or transportation back to her mother's house. She tried to contact her ex-boyfriend, but he did not respond. Chloe, then 19, was left stranded. She wandered around the neighborhood for several hours before encountering a gang member who had previously abused her. Cold and desperate, she got into his car and for the following weeks was trafficked across the country. Eventually, Chloe identified a new house to move into. Despite their dysfunctional relationship, her mother agreed to sign a rental agreement as Chloe's guarantor, as Chloe, then without income, knew she would not be able to afford the rent. After she moved in, she became aware of the fact that she was the only white British person in her neighborhood. Every other resident was South Asian. As a result, the gangs discovered where she was living and once again treated her house as if it was their own. The cycle of abuse continued, and Chloe's emotional state deteriorated significantly. Chloe was taken to a hospital after a suicide attempt, and while there, she discovered that she was pregnant. The father of the child, a Pakistani Muslim illegal immigrant, moved into Chloe's home. Chloe was subsequently coerced into converting to Islam and forced into marriage, both to legitimize a pregnancy in the eyes of her abuser and to assist him in securing a visa. Chloe's behavior became tightly controlled. She was forced to wear a hijab. She was prohibited from looking out the windows of her home, and if she misbehaved in the eyes of her husband, she would beat her black and blue, something that happened every day. Chloe's child was born with multiple health problems, including a defective kidney, due to the deteriorated condition of Chloe's womb as a result of the sexual abuse. Nevertheless, becoming a mother gave Chloe a renewed determination to get her life back on track. She reported the father of her child to the police after he assaulted the child, and he was removed from the property. She stopped taking drugs. She was focused, and for the first time, the gangs left her alone. One evening, she went out with a friend who lived across the road. Chloe, now a mother, did not drink heavily, but her friend became heavily intoxicated. A group of Asian men started speaking to them and offered to take Chloe and their friend home. Chloe was suspicious of them, but for the sake of her friend, agreed. Instead of taking them home, however, they were taken to a hotel. Chloe, who was not drunk, protested and encouraged her friend, who was paralytic, to leave with her. Chloe warned her friend about what she suspected was going to happen, but her friend refused to leave. Chloe, thinking of her daughter and seeking to protect herself, reluctantly left without her. The following day, Chloe's friend told Chloe that she had been raped by the men. This incident represented a turning point in Chloe's life. She decided that she needed to leave her hometown for good and get as far away from these Asian men as possible. By chance, she reconnected on Facebook with a man she had known in her early childhood, an old colleague of her mother who she describes as one of the only adult men in my life who never harmed me or treated me badly. She told him about everything she had been through and her desire to leave. He lived in Scotland and she was invited to visit him for the weekend, which she did. After returning home, she sought support from Women's Aid, who managed to secure her property in Scotland. With nothing but a daughter and a small bag, she left her hometown, leaving a lifetime of abuse and exploitation behind, and moved to Scotland, where she resides to this day. Chloe personally knows at least 20 other girls from her area who were predated on by the Muslim gangs who abused her. The pattern was always the same: grooming, drugging, trafficking, abuse, and rape. Furthermore, Chloe describes being taken into mosques where moms would describe non-Muslims as infidels and preach that white women who dressed inappropriately were free game. Chloe believes that the local police, social services, NHS, and government were all fully aware of what was happening, including the racialized nature of the crimes, but that they did not intervene for two reasons. Because they could not be bothered with the paperwork, and because they did not want to be seen as racist. Chloe blames these bodies and their major push for diversity for her abuse. Chloe says that if I can save just even one more child, girl, or boy from going through any of this, then I've done my job. That was Chloe's testimony. And as hard as it is to sit with, hers is one account among many. The report is full of them, other survivors, parents, and whistleblowers who came forward and put on the record what was done to them and how the people meant to protect them failed. So this won't be the last of it. Over the coming videos, I'll be working through the other testimonies as well, one at a time, in the survivors' own words, giving each the attention it deserves rather than reducing them to a statistic. These accounts were nearly buried, and the people in them spent years being ignored. The least I can do is make sure they're heard. If you think this matters, share it, and come back for the next one. I'll keep covering these for as long as it takes for them to be impossible to ignore. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.